A very wise philosopher once said, life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. My presentation today is taking one of the key elements of the Super Reform Program, namely Superstream data and payment standards, and give you an idea of what we're about to live through. I want to start with just a very quick snapshot about the standard. It is, as Hans said, about all contributions and rollovers being sent in a standard electronic format with linked electronic payments and within agreed performance standards. The key building blocks that have been identified as part of that standard are a set of standard terms and definitions, a standard electronic message format, electronic payments in all cases, development of standard e-commerce platforms, and a set of key enabling services to support data integrity around key identifiers. These standards are intended to operate within the context of some new performance standards, processing of transactions by employers and funds, depending on their role, within 3 days of the eligible date, and with a minimum amount of data and integrity checks being performed on the way through. The implementation timeline many of you would already have seen and be familiar with, but let me just summarise it. From the 1st of July 2013, all funds will be required to send and receive rollovers in this new electronic format and be in a position to start working with employers on a voluntary basis if they want to send contributions in the new standard format. From the 1st of July 2014, the focus will shift to large and medium employers, and they'll be required to send contributions compulsorily in the new electronic format. And from the 1st of July 2015, small business, those with less than 20 employees, will be required to also participate in this system and send contributions and payments in electronic format. So this is a big change for the industry. Let me take you to that future. June 2013. It might be difficult to imagine, but not everyone will be focused on Superstream. Around this time, a lot of people are going to be focused on the Tour de France, its 100th anniversary. Hopefully Australian cyclists will be doing their bit to get some glory in that big event. And even if you don't follow the cycling, I'm sure you'll be watching the television late at night just for the scenery. But let's cut to the chase. June 2013. What you need to be focused on, and you can't afford to miss, is being ready for day one of processing of rollovers. So your focus has to be fairly and squarely on being ready to implement the standard and to work with your employers or whatever stakeholders you represent for implementing the standard from that date. Let's come back another 3 months to March 2013. A lot of other people in Australia are going to be focused on the Beatles' first album, 50th anniversary. I put this in here knowing how many baby boomers there were likely to be in the room. I'm sure you'll recognise most of these very famous songs, and we're going to hear a lot of them in March next year. But unfortunately, that's not what most of you are going to be focused on, because you can't afford to miss out on having some very deep engagement at this stage with your business partners, if you haven't already, around how you're going to implement the standard, about onboarding them into the new processes, getting them used to the new ways in which they're going to have to make payments if they're not already making electronic payments, getting them ready to work with electronic transmission of their contributions data. So I'm suggesting to you a focus during this period has to be very much around testing and trials. It's too late to be mucking around with basic development work at this stage. You need to be well into your testing and trialling program so that you're ready for June, 1st of July. If we work our way back to December 2012, by the way, that's this year. It's only 9 months away. Everyone, of course, will be getting ready for Christmas holidays. Everyone will be thinking about what they're going to do over that period, getting together with family, enjoying themselves by the seaside or wherever you go. Unfortunately, this Christmas, you're going to have other things on your mind. You can't afford to miss checking that your implementation project for Superstream is on track. 6 months out from implementation, one of the things that you'll be focused on is making sure that any build and development work you're doing with systems is well progressed. In fact, is getting very close to completion so that you can be well into testing early in the new year. Either that, or if you're not implementing that yourselves, then certainly your partner needs to be the partner that you're working with needs to be well progressed, and you need to understand exactly where they're up to and what the implications are for the next phase of work. 3 months before this, August 2012, you can already see the publicity for all this building up, London Olympics. So we're going to be besieged as Australians with the heroic efforts of our swimming teams and our running teams, maybe not so much our running teams, but nevertheless we'll be told how competitive we are. But once again, you're not going to be able to spend too much time watching the Olympics because your focus is going to be on your very first project milestone if you haven't already committed to your first project milestone. And at the very least, you want to make sure that you've got your design complete by this stage. And I mean all of your design, not just how your systems are going to work, how your business processes are going to work, how your operational support is going to work, so that when you start building and start working with your stakeholders, you're able to tell them how these new systems and processes are going to work in real life, and so that you can properly resource your project. Bring us back to June 2012. There's a lot of people around the world, including Australia, who are going to be focused on this event, the Transit of Venus. Who can remember the last Transit of Venus? It was only 9 years ago, I think, roughly, 12 years ago. If you missed this one, you've got to wait another 100 plus years to see the next one. So you might want to find some time to see the Transit of Venus. But unfortunately, you're going to be focused on this event. Passage of standards legislation through the Parliament by the 30th of June 2012. And for those of you who haven't already done the legwork, you're going to be rushing around doing your project commitment work. What's your business case? What's your business approvals? What's your funding? What's your resourcing? What's your governance around a major implementation project which has to be up and ready 12 months from this date? Which brings us back to pretty close to today. Everyone's following the Eurozone crisis, and although the bondholders have agreed terms with Greece just during the last week or so, stay tuned for this instalment because there's more to come. They've still got an election to go through in the next couple of months. Anything could happen. And as I'm sure you've heard today and from other commentators, who knows where the European economy is going with all the restraint that it's being forced to go through. Unfortunately, we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about this conference presentation. Your focus right now needs to be on getting ready for Superstream, starting with scoping and investigation. I can see you all sitting out there, and I'm wondering how many of you have already taken the first steps to scope out what you need to do for Superstream, to understand what needs to change in your business, to start doing some pre-feasibility studies, even if you can't marshal the investment that you need to at this point. So getting ready for the future, your plan is going to look something like this. Scoping investigation, followed by project commitment by the middle of the year, some detailed design work finalised towards August, early September, well and truly into building any solution elements that you need by Christmas, into testing and trial and working with your stakeholders, starting to think about all the operational readiness elements that you've got ready to implement the standard 1st of July 2013. Good luck.
Well, do we have your attention? Thanks very much, Philip, for that insightful presentation. We've now reached the Q&A segment of this session, so you have an opportunity to ask some questions to the panel, but I'll start off. First, actually, a question to you. After all, it's a workshop, so please get your voting devices ready. Question 1, how big a change are the mandatory data and e-commerce standards to your fund? No big deal, we can take them in our stride. Ambitious but manageable. C, big, a major issue. D, unsure. Damien, is this a big deal?
Yeah, it's a massive deal. If we look just at the data standards without looking at the broader program, I mean, looking at in rest case, we have about 160,000 employers who pay to us on a regular basis. So in effect, that's what I'm trying to undertake, is change the behaviour of 160,000 employers, and everyone else in the room is going to be trying to change behaviour of their employers. And I don't think, whilst mandation is necessary, it's not sufficient, that there is a whole engagement project that needs to be done. This is outside the systems builds, in order to get that change of behaviour and in order to get efficiencies within the system. So, yeah, I think it's ambitious but manageable if you plan early enough.
So you've started?
Yes, we've started. We're certainly not taking the case that the legislation's not finalised, and so I'll wait for that clarity. In actual fact, and I think this is true of a lot of the stronger super reforms, a lot of them should be on the fund strategy anyway. I mean, which funds aren't thinking about channel migration with regard to their employers in one form or another anyway? Which funds aren't thinking about increased transparency, about the role of governance within the fund? So a lot of these stronger super reforms, whilst the legislation, you know, may not be quite through, a lot of that is on strategy anyway, and you should be planning and progressing those now.
So, Nigel, I mean, for your fund, for being general manager operations, is it a different issue than compared to like a rest?
Look, the challenge here is not what we do as individuals across the industry. At the moment, a large percentage of the contributions we receive are direct electronic, tapping out 80%. The challenge for us, though, is how we align as an industry, because the killer is the variation in the eyes of employers and members. And so not only do we each need to be motivated to bring about the task, but we need to be able to align at that point where we should be engaged to ensure the result in the eyes of the members and the employers is one that's just seamless. And so that's a challenge which is kind of inbuilt, but beyond just the task of individual funds.
Okay. So, question for the audience here. Question 2, how much is Superstream going to cost your fund? Damien, it's going to cost a lot of money. Where's that coming from? And, it's all going to happen at the same time when we're going to reduce the number of accounts.
Indeed. So I think this is where the planning and getting into that planning early is critical, to understand what you're going to do. Again, not just from a systems point of view, business processes, engagement and communications, change management models, to understand actually what the commitment will be. Some of that commitment will be directly of the funds, and will you be able to handle that in your normal operational costs? Or is that a cost over and above your normal operational costs? And so does that put pressure on fees, at least for a period of time? Some of it will also be at the expense, the cost initially of your administrator. Now, nothing comes for free, and I wouldn't expect it as well. So what are the implications on the administrator, and what does that do for their revenue models as well? And this is without, as you said, talking about any auto-consolidation or reduction in accounts, which is going to put additional pressure on both administrators and funds.
Anyone's got any questions?
Nigel, you said that 80% of your payments are electronic. The challenge, I think, might be that the additional data that's required in Superstream, how are your multiple employers going to get that data to you? And if they send you the data for choice contributions as well, how are you going to get that and transmit it to the appropriate party if you're acting on their behalf?
The majority of the online contributions we get are an online fund. We actually years ago built the online fund, which was designed to capture that data as a part of that process. The other volume that I'm referring to is just leveraging the existing online BSBs and BPay, and that's for the regular contributions. The challenge that you refer to is one which still resides across the challenge of Superstream on how you actually attach that rich data to it. So from my point of view, it was actually a setup and design of that fund.
Okay, but you haven't answered the... So the core question is, how are you going to... What's the infrastructure, or the mail system, or the hub, or the...
Oh, is this where I start to talk about technical stuff? Okay. I'm somewhat blessed by not knowing a lot about the technical stuff. My day job is looking after everything from a mail centre to a call centre and through the administration teams. I certainly understand the question and the challenge, but this is where we need to find what is a common system. And I can then talk about ASP, if you want to use that as an example. So the affiliation of superannuation practitioners, that was the challenge for us. So we started out with the 7 partners of AAS, Pillar, Super Partners, MLC, BT, AMP and Colonial First State, and we've actually struck an arrangement to actually shift that data with the dollars under connection. Now we're moving around about 6,000 a month now of rollovers, and now we need to look at where is their scale in that. So there is apparently some technical term called SOAP. Now to me, that's not something that stands out for those tech... Who's heard of SOAP as a technical term? Okay, cool. Okay, well, you can help me with this question then. So...
It is a workshop after all.
That's right. So SOAP is apparently this piece of technology, which is obviously a cleanser, I've got to throw that in, and that allows people to move the data on a web-based system. So that is the challenge. But the thing that I'd be very careful on this is that you've got to... The challenge for the industry, and the challenge whenever you look at trying to bring about efficiency, is not looking to a process and try to make that efficient, but question if that process is needed in the first place. And so you sometimes need to do that. Now, there is a lot of variation in this industry. However, you need to look at where are there existing mechanisms in the payments world that this industry can leverage from. Because I'm going a bit beyond the question that you've asked, but it does connect, and that really the solution that members and employers are looking for really can't be a shiny, glittery superannuation solution. The challenge of moving data with dollars resides across the industry and across many different environments. How is that industry or those other industries meeting this challenge? And we can't be too dissimilar from that. So a lot of the design principles and the options, like I'd never heard of SOAP before, or if you asked me I would have given you a very different answer a couple of weeks ago. That's the sort of technology that we've deemed across ASP to be scalable and workable for the industry and in line with the government's direction. Does that help?
Is Philip going to define some of those stuff within the standards, or the standards just to be the format of communication?
Yeah, so, is this on? Yep. So some of that is still to be settled, but in principle, certainly the leg that you're talking about, fund-to-fund transfers of contributions, we would see that happening according to the standard that's already been articulated using Internet Protocols web messaging, which is really what web services-based messaging, which is what SOAP is a variant of, or the common variant of, and that would define the way in which messages are transacted. If you look at the role of funds then in particular as to how they're going to implement that, there's not one single model that could be followed for that sort of implementation. Larger funds with a lot of capability will be able to stand up that web services capability themselves and manage that on distribution of contributions if they so desire themselves. Alternatively, they can do it through an intermediary or through a clearing service, and there's a lot of examples of that happening today in the electronic domain with choice contributions. So there's at least 2 or 3 different variations on that, but it will be mandated within the standard that it's web services based and based on the standard message format that I outlined earlier.
Okay. The issue, I suppose, is we're going to have a very short period of time where we need a lot of new skill set or existing skill set use it in the next 12 months on top of my super changes, on top of the prudential supervision changes, on top of many other changes that are coming through. how are we going to cope from a skill set perspective, given that, for example, some of the banks running programs at the moment, I know one bank, it's over $1 billion. So in terms of skill set and the technical skill set required to actually implement this, where are we going to get the skill set from? Damien?
I think in some of the technical things with regard to the systems, there's already significant skill sets within our administrators, and it's but it will then be a call about if we are diverting those skill sets to these required areas, what are they being taken off, or what's the opportunity cost in other areas as a result of that? But there are significant skills bases there. I think the skills bases that we're going to have a bit of trouble with is sort of outside the administrators, and more with regard to the funds, in regard to the project planning, with regard to thinking about the opportunities to streamline or even question whether processes should exist. Otherwise, we'll just be caught in making current processes and making them electronic, and that doesn't necessarily get you the level of efficiency that you're ultimately trying to aim for. So I think there's huge opportunities in front of funds to do more than, if you like, compliance in this area, but that is going to take specialist skills, specialist project skills, and I don't necessarily see that they are embedded in funds today, or not in sufficient numbers, and so you'll have a lot of funds going out there seeking these resources at the same time. So if you don't plan early to understand what the requirements are going to be on you, and you don't therefore work out what your capability requirements are, and you don't put your foot on those resources, it's sort of like picking a team at school, a soccer team. You might get what's left over. You might be picking from the last few, and I think that could be a concern.
Okay. Jenny?
I had a question for the ATO. I just wanted to know what strategies the ATO has at the moment for engaging employers in this process, particularly small business, given that there's going to be strict liability penalties incurred, and whether a budget has been set aside to fund that engagement.
So the answer to that question is yes. We have established a budget for doing that and have a formal onboarding strategy which addresses not just employers and small business, but intermediaries, including payroll companies, and other key intermediaries we see playing a role in helping implement the new standard, but also to work with funds as well, given that funds are the first cab off the rank and they're a key leverage point for not only acceptance of the standard, but working with employers. The onboarding strategy also deals with how we work with that cohort as well. In terms of the small business sector, it is 3 years away, but we have already done quite a lot of thinking about the nature of the strategy we should follow. I could summarise it for you in this respect. Firstly, there is no single implementation model that works for small business, and we've been very careful to inform our thinking around onboarding and the implementation of the standard to encompass lots of different methods by which small business can come easily into working with the new standard. That includes signing up with the Medicare Small Business Clearinghouse, which is a zero-cost option for small business, and which has recently gone through very rapid growth and will be implementing the new standard as and when it becomes available, so that anybody who signs up to that today will automatically be able to work with the new standard. Secondly, we've been working with payroll companies in assisting them in understanding how the XBRL format can be incorporated into payroll packages, so that small business with payroll packages can organically produce the contributions that are required in future just by effectively upgrading and implementing the relevant payroll system. The third thing which we've done is look at the role of other important intermediaries such as accountants and bookkeepers and others who play crucial support services to small business. A lot of small business rely on business advisors or business partners to help them get things done. And we think that this is one of the ways in which small business will be able to leverage that support. Fourthly, clearinghouses will today and will in the future play an important role above and beyond the Medicare Small Business Clearinghouse, because not everybody wants to deal with government through a Medicare type agency. And we think that a lot of the clearinghouses, particularly as they start to form relationships with payrolls and payroll bureaus, will be a very important channel for small business. Fifthly, we're looking to funds through their portals to become Superstream compliant, so that small business who wants to do direct entry or even file upload can do that and still be compliant with the standard. So as you can see, there are at least 5 different ways in which small business can be encouraged, facilitated and enabled to come on this journey. Will it be a difficult pathway? Yes, it will. We're certainly going to be looking to use every channel of communication and influence between now and that time to convince small business to come on. There will be a transition period. The ATO, you mentioned the penalties. Traditionally, the ATO, in introducing any new measure, always focus on education and support, not penalties. And we will do exactly that when small business comes on board in the middle of 2015, and be looking to make sure that small business understands their obligations, understands who they can work with, and have the chance to familiarise themselves with the options that I've just been outlining.
Thank you, Philip. Now, that's one important stakeholder, the small business group, and of course they have to start likely from 1 July 2015. But there's another group of 425,000 SMSFs, and they will have to start from 1 July 2013. Any idea how we're going to do that?
So it's a little bit the same in the sense that there's not one size fits all for self-managed super funds, and those of you who know that sector well will know there's a great deal of diversity in capabilities, size and orientation of self-managed super funds. So there's a core of super funds that rely on administrators, and we're very confident that they will find their way forward in terms of being able to implement the new standard in terms of receiving contributions or rollovers initially quite easily. Many superannuation self-managed super funds also rely on accountants for services, and we think that accountants will play a particular role in providing a service here as well in terms of being able to receive contributions and rollovers on behalf of their clients, as will investment management accounts, which traditionally self-managed super funds use for investing their accounts. There's already electronic relationships, notification relationships with those financial institutions, and rollovers and contributions can be directed electronically to those accounts in the future. We also think that we're going to see new technology emerge in this space in the form of smart apps, which will enable people either on their desktop or through cloud services to receive contributions and rollovers at a very low cost. Once again, will that be an easy proposition to see roll out through the self-managed super fund sector? No, it won't. It will take time, it will take effort, and it will take convincing, but we believe that with the right support and the right reinforcement, that over time that sector will also convert into a position where it can implement the standard and be a party to the changes that I've outlined.
Okay, question for the audience. How long do you think it will take your fund or your provider to prepare for the Superstream changes once you get it ready to start? But, you know, Damien, I mean, last week Minister Shorten came out, you know, and FOFA, you know, has been deferred for a year effectively. You know, I mean, Superstream, you know, because the alignment with my super, so we just deferred another year. I'm sure that we'll be able to organise that somehow.
I'm not going to try and speak on what the political situation is going to result in regard to the timing of legislation. But again, I come back to earlier points that a lot of this stuff about getting employers to pay electronically is likely to be on strategy for each of the funds in this room anyway. So, yeah, you want to do it well, but I don't think you can defer 12 months. There'll be enough players who are out there doing it within that compliance timeframe anywhere, who are prepared, who have planned and are preparing to build. I mean, I said that we had, you know, around 150,000 employers that contribute regularly to us. There are going to be, each of you would have your equivalent numbers. If we added them all up, we'd probably get between 2 or 3 million employers that we all touch. Now, there's only 850,000 of them. So every fund is getting contributions from multiple employers, and employers are paying to multiple funds. When there is one provider who is out there saying to an employer, I can make it easy for you, who are they going to go with? So you've got to look at this from the employer's point of view, that if you wait, there are going to be other funds that are out there ready and going to your employers and saying, can you pay to me? That may not change one iota which members go to the fund, but they're going to develop a relationship, and a stronger relationship with those funds who are out there ready. And so your question is, are you going to be one of those funds, or are you just going to be passive and wait for all the contributions to arrive via a clearinghouse, potentially through that other provider? So it's up to you which position you want to be, but I don't think it's enough to sort of say, well, it's mandated, I'll wait for the stick. I think you've got to provide the carrot to your employers and engage with them about what solution you are providing out there.
Okay, question.
We're tending to create an impression that this is going to be a terrible shock for employers, but what proportion of employers today remit their PAYE instalments electronically, and what proportion of small businesses today lodge their BAS returns and their GST payments electronically?
I don't know those exact figures, but certainly where they use accountants, they're very high proportion. But if we have done some recent research looking, for example, at the take-up of payroll solutions within small business and those that are still working with purely manual solutions. And although the data on this still hasn't been completely verified, that research pointed to only about 12% of small business who are still doing things in a purely manual mode. Another cohort above that that are doing a mixture of manual and electronic processes. So although there's still, and you know, we think that the target group is at least 25 to 30% of that small business group. Now that's a big number. That's 150,000 odd businesses at least. So I wouldn't underestimate the size of that challenge. But we've got 3 years before we even get to day one. The Medicare Small Business Clearinghouse, and I'm only just using this example because I don't think it's the silver bullet that's going to solve this problem, but it had about 7,000 users subscribe to it towards the middle of last year with no marketing, zero marketing. A direct mail campaign was done in collaboration with the ATO to small business to about 600,000 small businesses, and within 6 months that had grown threefold to over 20,000, nearly 22, 23,000 businesses, with just a very traditional mail in the envelope, of which our post research showed half the business threw it away, so it wasn't a terribly effective communication tool. So that proportion is going to continue to grow and grow very significantly. There's a whole lot of other initiatives that are going on. I mean, some of the stuff that payroll companies are doing to make this easy for businesses in future is very, very good. You need to have a look at what some of them are doing. And they are already way ahead of a lot of people in the super industry in terms of getting ready for this change, because they'd already been geared up for this with the government's work around standard business reporting, XBRL, and the use of AusKey. So that's another factor. AusKey is growing very rapidly in the Australian business community. Nearly a third of businesses roughly now have an AusKey, which is making it easier and easier for them to do electronic commerce.
Nigel, you know, you're on the Swimmer Sea Council as well, and Swimmer Sea, I suppose, is a data standard that on a voluntary basis was put together for use for the industry to make it more efficient. It hasn't been successful. So what's different in relation to Superstream? What have you learned, I suppose, from that we can now make sure we don't make the same mistakes?
Look, I think you could put that example amongst many others that the industry have tried in the past and failed, and it's not through a lack of will or intent. I think they just try to bite off too much. The problem that I've found, and when you try to get a group of people together, there's a lot of variation, there's a lot of system issues, and there's some legacy issues that we all have to deal with. If you expect to come to the table where collaboration is proposed to exist, with all the dirty laundry, that's what stops it. I think where we do see an opportunity and where we've been able to demonstrate that is you don't try to bite off too much. I mean, it's incredibly daunting. Like, I feel coming into this presentation quite confident where my organisation's at. But seeing the size of the room, seeing some of the questions, you know, it is quite a daunting task. I think the difference that we're now seeing, and if we miss this opportunity, it'll be to our detriment, is to work out where we across this industry can align. And sometimes it's at the simplest of functions. It may not be resolving all the problems and the issues within the system, but it can. I mean, we're crowing about some stats in ASP, but all we've done is automated the mail. Right? We've basically had to prepare our organisations to pick up and send data and dollars. But we've had to do that. Now, if you're sitting back and waiting, you know, maybe one of these questions, and I love Phil's approach to this by looking at it in reverse, what's the danger of not acting? What's it going to look like when this actually does happen in the industry? What's going to happen when you have a time frame to operate within and your internal mechanisms aren't actually geared up and ready to engage? Now, I had a question earlier about exactly how does that data and dollar move, and that's a fundamental question, and we need to be able to resolve that. However, there are things that we can already do within our business to be able to get that up and running. So I think it's quite a broad answer to your question, Hans, but there are simple activities that we can do where competition should not and does not exist. Now, to be fair, you know, the first few months of us working together was more about could we work together. We engaged Morse Consulting as an independent party to actually manage some of the sensitivities that we may not have wanted to bring to the table, and that's a wise move because that allows people to move comfortably. You know, we've actually found now, and it's quite embarrassing when I try to explain to my boss exactly what we've done in these auto rollovers, it's not rocket science. Yet the challenge was the collaboration and actually working together, and that's the piece that is within our control. So we need to be looking for opportunities for that now.
Okay. Any questions from the floor? There's a hand right at the back. And a person attached to it.
Just a question for Phil. We've spoken about companies and super funds and everything like that. What's the situation, say, regarding clubs, say a bowls club, a golf club or something like that, where they may have one or two employees and the payroll is just done manually by a member acting as a bookkeeper type of thing, but there's still an obligation to pay an SG contribution? Would they be required to meet the new legislation? And if so, what would be the time frame?
So yes, they would. So they'd have until, I think you're describing a situation where they'd be under the 20 employee threshold, in which case they've got until the 1st of July 2015. And going back to the options that I outlined for you, they would have the option of signing up with the Medicare Small Business Clearinghouse, so they can still have manual processes that they're operating. They could work with their accountant bookkeeper who might have a solution for them, or they could do direct data entry perhaps with their default fund that they're a member of. So there's at least 3 options. Now, certainly that's a change of practice from the way that they currently operate, and we certainly understand that there's going to be a reluctance and some resistance to moving change in this area. But as with any change management exercise, you look to move your early group of adopters in the first phase to build up a critical mass, and then you work on the hardest bit last. There will be legislative requirements and sanctions here, but there'll also be an active engagement program, and so we would see progressively those sorts of businesses over time being brought online along with everybody else. Even if it means behind the scenes they've still got, you know, the person that's doing the books at night at home, that's fine. As long as they can participate in the system electronically through one of these agencies, intermediaries, or some other avenue, then we've got a much better system, which will work much more efficiently for the members' interests. We won't have as many lost accounts. We won't have as many data integrity problems, and we'll have lower cost across the whole system, because we won't be trying to support lots of different ways of collecting and receiving contributions.
Damien, from 33 million accounts to say about 18, 20 million, I don't think the government ever actually set a target in the next 2 years, but at the same time, funds and providers will have to invest hundreds of millions of dollars to make stronger super and all the other reforms a reality. The perfect storm. You already mentioned that there will be significant changes in terms of account-based fees and fees models. What about insurance and insurance premiums? We seem to not really have a lot of discussions around that at the moment.
I mean, it's one of the open issues, I suppose, with the auto consolidation as to what actually will be the insurance liability. I mean, there's proposal in place about what will happen, that if someone is auto consolidated forward, if you like, they pick up the insurance of the new fund on the basis that that is more likely to be tailored to be relevant to their new occupation than where they've come from. Now, there's lots of details to be sorted out there. I think that what that results in insurance premiums depends on what that does to the insurance pools, whether they're fairly homogeneous at the moment, but if the nature of the insurance pools changes significantly because of that auto consolidation, then that could lead to increased administration costs of claims, as well as different claims profiles. So that could lead to premiums going in either direction. I think it's a matter for the insurers to work out how comfortable they are. Ultimately, the same Australians are being insured, but what are they being insured for? So it's a still watch this space at this stage, but I wouldn't expect it to remain stable, is about the only thing I can say.
Okay. There's actually a session tomorrow, parallel stream 3, on auto consolidation in this room, I believe. No, in the Great Hall 1 and 2, so might be worthwhile checking in there. Question for the audience. You've seen the Superstream implementation timeline, and you've heard Philip, Damien and Nigel talk about some of the things they've been doing. Anyway, so how confident is your fund that Superstream will be fully up and running by 1 July 2013? Seems that we have to do a bit of work in this area for the next 12 months as well, around onboarding and about the strategy and how we communicate with stakeholders in this process. And you already mentioned, Philip, that you've got some plans around that we'll see over the next few months, I suppose. Okay, well, it's 4:25, so we've got another 5 minutes. Well, for some. So my last question is for the audience, for the panel here. It's 2017. We've implemented Superstream and all the other reforms. What will the experience look like? Very briefly, from the different stakeholder perspective. Just pick one. Damien.
Collectively in the industry, there will be less hair and more of it will be grey.
We've worked here for a while.
Nigel.
From my point of view,
Yes, we get the hint. Thanks.
Okay, so Damien's taken my first answer. I think in 2017, an employer's perspective would be they're able to look after the operation of their business as their primary focus, and all matters dealing with superannuation payments, government reporting to salaries is one which is seamless and works in that environment, broader than just super.
Okay, Philip?
I think if I just looked at this for a moment from the government's perspective, I would think that many of the segments had passed the point of no return in terms of adoption of the standards and were reaching high levels of maturity in terms of how it was working. I think small business will still be a significant factor at that stage, but a continuing effort on the part of government to convince and help that industry or that segment of Australian business meet this sort of challenge, because it's fundamental to operating in the future.
Okay. I actually did want to bring the members into this as well. I think by 2017 we will actually start to be reaping some of the opportunities for members. You know, we will start to understand what the implications of having better data, quicker data flowing through the system are. And it'll be, I think the winners of the funds are those that see this more than a compliance obligation and see it as an opportunity to how they design their business rules. All of us have got insurance terms and conditions that are dependent upon all the vagaries of the data that we receive. We'll see them reflected in all our letters, we'll see them reflected in all our business rules, we'll see that, and dare I say it, in the engagement we have today with our members because of what we've got to deal with at the moment. When we start to clear all of that, even though we might have some historical data issues to resolve, the opportunities for funds and for members to better service members and employers, as Nigel has said, if we reap that well, then members will benefit significantly, and I would say that the engagement by members with their funds will increase as a result as well.